My name is Cameron Ames. I'm the Chief Technical Manager of Synoptis. And you all are here to learn about Heroku CI and SFDX and how to automate your processes through that. Now, I want to get a feel for what you all are here to learn about. So I was talking with some of you. I talked with Brian and Sean, and they were saying that, they're using SFDX already, and they're using those tools. They're just not using it for the CI side of things, and they're curious to know what that's about. How many of you are in that situation right now? Okay, yeah, that's a lot of you. I was also talking with some other folks. For example, Kyle, who was telling me that, they're still on some older deployment processes, and they're looking to modernize that, even if they're not using the SFDX tool set. How many of you are in that situation? Now, all right, there's no shame here. We're all friends here. How many of you are still using changesets exclusively? All right, that's okay. That's okay. We're all here to learn. Just a little bit about myself before we get started. So I am 14-time Salesforce certified. I've been in the ecosystem for half a decade now. Before that, I was a .NET developer, and I was in IT operations before that. I also co-lead the Indianapolis Salesforce developer group. So if you're ever in the Indianapolis area, come say hello to me. Or maybe not if you're just flying through. That's probably what you want to do. So, now, how many of you currently use Heroku in some capacity? OK, how many of you use it for CI? All right, so we've got some other experts here. What? You guys come up here. You present. No, I'm kidding. Now, hopefully, no matter where you're at, in your adoption of SFDX, or in your maturity for your CI CD pipelines, or in your adoption of Heroku, hopefully you get something out of this session. Whether it's, hey, I want to go try a new tool, or, oh, this could really change how we work. I have a passion for making developers' lives easier. Now, why is that? Well, when developers can get out from all of the nitty-gritty stuff, all of the tooling, all of the configuration, they can focus on what really matters, and honestly, for most developers, what makes them happy, which is delivering cutting-edge solutions that have awesome amounts of business value. How many of you are developers in the room, and you're going, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to build cool things. I don't want to worry about tooling stuff. Yeah, yeah. Now, before we get started, it's important to know what we're talking about here. We want to have a unified set of definitions here, because often Heroku, or excuse me, CI and CD, they're just kind of tossed around, and sometimes the definitions aren't clear between the two of them. I've been in this boat before. How many people just say CI CD and you kind of throw them together and you don't know which one's which necessarily? All right, well, there are some of you who are telling the truth out here. No, I'm kidding. So let's go through these one by one. CI, continuous integration. What CI is talking about is merging into a shared location, which is normally some sort of repository, a master branch of that, and your tests automatically run on that. The idea is you minimize the feedback loop for your developers between when they first write a feature and when everybody else gets to see that. That's the biggest measure here. CD, continuous delivery. That's the automation of deployments. How much hassle is it to move your metadata, deploy your code from one area to the next, from a sandbox to prod, from a sandbox to another sandbox, from one environment to another? How difficult is that? And in an ideal world, this looks like just one click is ideal. Now, let's take these two together, continuous integration and continuous delivery, and let's think about the next logical step. If you have a short feedback loop for your developers, and your tests are running automatically, and you trust those tests, and you've minimized the number of steps it takes for a deployment down to one, well, why don't you just trust those tests to do the deployment for you? And that's where we get the second CD here, because it wasn't confusing enough. We had to have two CD acronyms in the same space here. That was really well thought out. I'm glad we planned it that way. Continuous deployment is the automatic start of deployments. It's the idea that you trust your tests and your automated systems enough to serve as the gateway, the checkpoint, before moving from one environment to another. We're going to focus primarily on this session on CI and continuous delivery, not continuous deployment. But it's good to know that that's out there. Now, what makes for a good Salesforce CI CD? This is important that we make this distinction. There are things that make for a good CI CD, but may not fit for Salesforce. And there are things that fit for Salesforce that would leave most development environment professionals scratching their heads a little bit. Ultimately, what are we looking for here? We're looking for a CI CD system that will let a team trust in the automated utilities. And it can get out of the way, it can stop worrying about all of that tooling, and it can focus on delivering business value. That's the whole goal. That's the reason why we do this. Now, what does that look like? It's fully automated. Well, yeah. I mean, what are we doing here if it's not fully automated? That's the whole point. Clean metadata API support. So this is one that is specific to Salesforce. How many of you are using Ant right now? Okay, so that's a good portion of you. How many of you, it was a huge hassle to figure out how to get Java into the environment because it's technically not supported at the time? Yeah, I'm seeing some hands out there. How many people had some sort of environment variable mismatch, or the Java version was wrong, or something like, yeah, more hands. It's something that you as a Salesforce professional have to deal with that isn't really as common in other spaces. How many of you, and this is rare, but I'm interested if there are hands here, how many of you have essentially rolled your own client for the metadata API because you couldn't use Ant for some reason? Oh, I've 2 hands out there. All right. So yeah, it happens. I'm sorry for you. I'm so sorry. Support for Salesforce file formats. And this doesn't just mean, okay, can it parse the XML? Although that is important. What about, how many of you have linting systems? Okay, code scanners. Yeah, I see some more hands there. How many of you have it for your Lightning Web components or your Aura components? All right. Now, how many of you have rules in those systems that, they really make sense in the broader JavaScript world, but you kind of look at them funny when you look at it with Lightning Web components or with Aura components? A couple hands there. Yeah. You want to make sure that they support the Salesforce file formats appropriately. And the last thing, this is a bonus, but it's nice. It's nice if it's inexpensive. The value is there even if it's not, but isn't it nice that if something's out there where you can try it for free or for a low price, that's always helpful. I think that's one of the reasons Salesforce is so popular. You can go to developer.salesforce.com and get those free orgs. Now, we are going to have to measure how good our CI CD systems are. Now, I want you to think about 2 things while we're going through the rest of this presentation. Number 1, I want you to think about the 3 questions I'm about to show you. I want you to think about them as far as, what does your CI CD system do? And if you don't have one right now, great. You don't have to think about that part. Take that part off. 2, I want you to think about, how does that stack up against Heroku CI and Heroku pipelines? So the first question, number 1, how many steps does it take to set up a new pipeline? Okay? Meaning, you've got a new app, you've got a new org, you've got a new environment where you're wanting a new system set up. How much of a hassle is that? Is that going to be, okay, I've got to figure out what executables I need in here, I've got to figure out all the environment variables, I've got to figure out the architecture of the solution here, what's going on here? How long does that take? Number 2, how many steps does it take to run our automated tests? And this one should look familiar. It was from 2 or 3 slides ago where we said, hey, what we need to do for CD is, or for CI is, we need to run our automated tests. We need to merge back into a common location as quickly as possible and run automated tests. How many steps does that take? That's important. Number 3, how easy is it to deploy our changes? How easy is it to move metadata? How easy is it to move code from one org to the next? Because if you can answer these 3 questions and say confidently, yeah, I can do this easy right now. It's one step for each. You're probably pretty mature in your CI CD processes. If you're not, maybe you need to take a look at this. Now, here's where Heroku comes in. Now, a good portion of you are using Heroku right now, but I saw some people who weren't quite as familiar with it. Heroku is a scalable application platform that leverages build packs for compilation. Now, what does that alphabet soup of buzzwords actually mean? A scalable application platform means that you don't have to worry about the infrastructure behind it. You only have to worry about making sure that your code functions as intended, and Heroku will worry about the infrastructure behind that and the scalability of that. If you've built your application, Heroku can scale up simply by your press of a button. Now, build packs are Heroku's way of processing different types of programs. There are maybe 10 out of the box, and these are open source sets of scripts that are used to convert your source code into what's called a slug that is used to execute on Heroku. There's over 5,000 of these that are community supported. So chances are, if you don't see one that's doing what you want out of the box, chances are there's one out in the community that's doing exactly what you need. And there's also this ecosystem of add-ons. There's hundreds of add-ons for Heroku. For example, you need a database. There's MySQL, there's Postgres, there's all sorts of ones. Simply search for it, click add, done. You have a database URL in your environment, it's already done. Now, Heroku is owned by Salesforce, which means you get a lot of tight integrations with Salesforce too. For example, let's say you need Salesforce data in Heroku. You can use the Heroku Connect add-on, which is free, in order to synchronize your data from Salesforce to a database in Heroku. You could also use one of the Einstein Analytics add-ons in order to get at that data as well. But the gist of it is, Heroku is going to take your source code, use one or multiple build packs, and convert it into source that it can run. Now, the Heroku CI piece is a little bit separate. Why is that? Well, Heroku, out of the box, already supports both continuous delivery and continuous deployment. The piece that it was missing was continuous integration. And so they released Heroku CI as a low configuration test runner. What does low configuration mean? It's exactly like what it sounds. You don't have to fiddle with it a bunch. Click, done. It's got tight integration to version control. So anytime you have a commit, we'll hook into that. It'll run those tests. It'll report back to your version control system and update the status there as well. It also leverages those Heroku build packs. So you have all the power of those 5,000 sub-odd amounts of tooling where just with the click of a button, you can leverage those in your tests. Now, we're going to be looking at some examples here in a second. We're going to look at a hands-on demo. Here's the landscape of what we have for this example. So let's say you have an organization where you have a production Salesforce environment. You've got a staging sandbox and a dev sandbox. And you're using that dev hub to create scratch orgs, which you're doing your development in. You also have your code hosted on GitHub. And you're going to be using Heroku for your CI and CD processes. Because we're using Salesforce, we're going to use the Salesforce CLI build pack, which allows us to use SFDX tools, the Salesforce build pack, which automates some of the complexities of the CLI, and then the Node.js build pack in order to host a redirect from our Heroku application to any environments that we need within Salesforce. Now, remember, I said you've got 2 jobs. One, how does your current CI CD system stack up against these 3 questions? 2, how does Heroku CI stack up against these 3 questions? We're going to take a look at these one by one. How many steps does it take to set up a new pipeline? Well, with Heroku CI, the answer is 4. Fork it, clone it, run it, set it. That's it. Fork the repository, the starter repository, clone it down to your local machine, run the setup script, and then set the environment variable to you want to automatically run tests. So let's look at an example here. So all you need to get started is a Heroku account and a GitHub account. That's all you really need. Now, don't worry about getting any links here. I'm going to have a bit.ly at the end where you can get a link to all of the repositories that I'm showing you. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to fork the sample repository for the SFDX build pipeline for Heroku. Now, this is under my account. I've made some tweaks to it, but I don't want to take all the credit for this. The real credit goes to Wade and his team. How many of you were in the developer keynote earlier today? Okay. Yeah. Well, they are the ones who are the real workhorses behind this. I've done very little to this. But after we fork the repository and bring it into our ownership, we're going to clone that, which we can see the folder right there. We'll open it in VS Code. How many of you are using VS Code right now? All right, very good. Awesome. Now, I want to show you that I've already established that I have 3 Salesforce orgs in Salesforce CLI. I've got dev, prod, and stage, and production will serve as my dev hub. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run this setup script. And you don't need to worry about the implementation details so much, but suffice it to say that this setup script is going to be the cornerstone of setting up our pipeline. So remember, we've done 1, fork it, 2, clone it. 3 is now run it. We're going to run the setup script. And once we run the setup script, it's going to ask us for a series of answers. It's going to ask for, OK, what's the alias of our dev hub? What's the alias of our dev sandbox, of our stage sandbox, and of our production org? Notice how dev hub and prod are separate, although we are putting the same org for both of them. It's also going to ask for the GitHub repository, so it can automatically link it to her. And we're going to use a relative URL here. It assumes github.com at the beginning, so I just put my username and my repository. You would put yours there. It's going to go to work. We don't have to do anything else. We've set it. What's going on right now is 4 or 5 things are going on right now. Number 1, it's creating 1 Heroku app for each environment, a dev, a stage, and a prod. It's also creating a Heroku pipeline, which is a series of apps that are put together in a certain order representing the delivery pipeline that your organization has. After that, it's going to set a number of environment variables that are necessary for the SFDX environment to function, including authentication to your orgs and locations of some of the executables in the build packs. And again, we don't have to worry about this. It just works. Additionally, it's going to specify the build packs that we are going to be using. So it's going to specify that we want to use the Salesforce build pack. We want to use the the Salesforce CLI build pack. And we want to use the Node.js build pack as well. Now, this does take a minute, but hey, it's 1 run. Now, after it links to the repository and says, OK, this is the GitHub environment that hosts our code, it's going to set the authentication URLs for Salesforce. And then we're done. Let's take a look at what it looks like in Heroku now. If we refresh the page, we can see we now have a pipeline. And it auto-named it for us. There are ways to manually name it if you want. And we see we have 3 applications, 1 for dev, 1 for staging, and 1 for production. So it was that easy, 4 steps. Next, how do we measure our CI CD number 2? How many steps does it take to run our automated tests? Again, this is one of the cornerstones of CI. For Heroku, it's one step. Change it. That's it. Make a change, and it will run. Okay? So we're going to pick up where we left off. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to follow the prompt that says enable CI. We're going to click on that. And all we have to do beyond that is just confirm with another click. Done. Now tests will automatically run when there's a commit to our GitHub repository. What we'll do here is we will make a change in our application. Now, we just have some sample code here, so it's going to be a bit contrived, but you'll get the idea. We'll create a new branch, and we'll modify a Visualforce page and an Apex controller. So again, this is just the basic sample Visualforce page that it comes with, but we'll say, you know, we've got this cool new feature here. And in addition to that, there's a get API version or get app version within the Apex controller. We'll version bump that as well. 1.0.3, great, done. We'll save that. And then using the GitHub command line, we'll commit that. And then after that, we'll push that to our remote repository. How many of you are using GitHub right now? OK, so a lot of you, great. How many of you are using any CI system that integrates well with GitHub? There's a lot out there. OK, so quite a few of you. OK, so then this will look familiar to you, at least some of it. What we're going to do is after we've pushed the remote repository, we go to our test tab, and we can see within a few seconds, Heroku CI is hooked into that, and we'll start executing our tests. Now remember, all we had to do was run that setup script, and Heroku CI knows how to take care of the rest. Because we specified that we're using the SFDX CLI build pack, the Salesforce build pack, and the Node.js build pack, it already knows exactly what to do. It will install those tools within the environment. It will run tests to make sure that this application is compatible with those build packs. And then it will run our tests. Now, how does it run those tests? Well, because we specified a dev hub, it's going to use a Scratch org in order to run those tests, a clean environment. And you can see here, it looks like it's about ready to start. And our test failed. OK. So what went wrong here? Let's see. OK, so we changed our API or app version number, and we didn't update our unit test. Side note, how many people have, again, no shame. This is safe. How many people have done this before where you didn't test it before you pushed it to the repository? I see one hand. Yeah, all right. It's OK. I've done it too. We really should not be doing that, but I've done it too. So let's go in and update our unit test to 1.0.3. We'll do the same thing we did before. We'll commit it. We'll push it to GitHub. And we'll run those tests again. Again, you should not be using this as your system for unit testing. There's unit tests built into the CLI that you can use. You can use the dev console. You can go into Salesforce Classic and run Apex tests if you want to. But no matter how you do it, don't use your CI CD system as a way to just validate your unit tests. And now we can see that there's another unit test, or there's another test that's been started. And it'll do the same thing. Now, while I've got a minute here, I have time for maybe one question while this is going on. Any questions so far? Yeah. Sure. OK.
So I've heard a lot of issues around metadata and DX and all this kind of stuff, right?
OK.
That makes a lot of testing very difficult sometimes.
Sure.
And all that. How does this support that sort of thing?
So, is in terms of difficulty for testing, I think a lot of it comes to when the SFDX tool was first released, there were a lot of compatibility problems with certain metadata types. A lot of those have been resolved, fortunately. So we really don't have too many of those issues anymore. The second thing is there's a way to run Apex tests within the CLI now, which really helps. So I think a lot of those have been resolved. Now, we can see that our unit tests have passed here, which is great. Again, one step. We enabled Heroku CI, and it worked. Now, step 3. How do we measure our CI CD? How easy is it to deploy our changes? This is question number 3. This is the crux of continuous deployment. 2 steps to deploy our changes. Check it and pull request it. That's it. We're going to pick up right where we left off with that unit test. And what we'll do is we'll first browse that commit, which we can access directly from Heroku. We'll validate what was changed here, and we can see that in GitHub it's received the message that Heroku CI was successful. After that, what we're going to do is we're going to enable deployments from within Heroku. We're going to enable, first, review apps. Review apps are fairly new. There's a new version of them that came out recently. Review apps will automatically create a clone of an application that you can look at and see what would change in comparison to how that application's state currently looks. In our case, what that will look like is that will be a scratch org with all of the metadata that would go to our sandboxes before we merge that into master. We're going to open up this pull request, and we can see that all the checks have passed. The branch has no merge conflicts. We're going to validate that the changes that we see are what we were expecting to see. And we see the unit test, the XML change. We trust Salesforce to handle that, the visual force page, and then our Apex controller. So that looks good. We'll go and merge our pull request now. Oh, sorry. We can see that Heroku CI passed and that GitHub has received that message. And we can also see that when we open the pull request, Heroku CI starts building a review app for us. Again, this action is specified by the build pack. Because we're using the Salesforce build pack, it knows that when we create a review app, we need to be creating a scratch org and deploying our metadata changes to that. And so that's what it will do. After a few minutes, this deploys, and we have a clone of our development sandbox without any of the, or with the metadata changes that we've made. Now, this is helpful when you have someone like a product owner who wants to review something, and they want to see that in action, but maybe there's some sort of overlapping change that doesn't let you deploy it to a shared sandbox, or there's some other limiting factor, or maybe this is a very sensitive change. Well, they can see that in isolation, and they can manually review that before we even see anything. It's a little bit hard to see up there, but you can see that on our visual force page, we opened up the scratch org, which we have a link to directly from Heroku CI. Open the scratch org, and we can see the visual force page has our new features. So you can point someone to Heroku and say, go review this. They open it, scratch org opens, they review what they want to. Once that manual review is done, you can then merge that if you want. Now, it also notes in GitHub that it was deployed to Heroku, and you can also access the scratch org from within GitHub. Now, once this loads, Showing you a third way that you can access this. You can access it directly from the Heroku Pipelines dashboard as well. There are all sorts of ways that you can, with one click, access a scratch org that was set up automatically for you, that has executed your tests, validated that those work, deployed your metadata to it, and now you have an isolated instance of what you need to review. That's pretty powerful. We're now going to merge this pull request. And once we merge it, because we enabled automatic deployments on our development instance or on our development application, it's going to immediately start to deploy that. And we can see that there's one check pending. We checked that it needs to run unit tests first. We've already ran them before. It's optional for you. However, I personally like to run tests anytime any code merges anywhere. That's best practice. So it's going to run those same steps. And again, I've got time for maybe one question here. Any questions? Yeah, in the back. So the setup is partially provided by the platform team. However, the sample repository is not maintained anymore. That's why I hosted it on mine, is because it's up to date now. But yes, they do have the build pack and all that. Yeah, that's them. That's absolutely them. So that's totally supported by Salesforce. Now, once our unit tests pass, we can go back and we can see it's deployed to development. And we can log into our sandbox. And you could use that URL again. You can open it directly from Heroku, but you can also do it the traditional way. And we can validate once again that, yeah, our changes are there. Everything worked properly. Now, this is not the end of everything. This is a good start, but this is not everything that we need, or this is not everything that we could do. SFDX has capabilities to deploy data, and you could do that to a scratch org. So when someone goes to manually review that, you can add data to that org. But this is a very good start for us. Now, what's next? Well, if any of you know the Daft Punk song from the mid-2000s, what we've actually done in these steps is we've created a verse to that song. Fork it, clone it, run it, set it, change it, check it, pull request it. Sign up for a Heroku account. Start playing with those sample repositories. Have fun Herokuing. Everything that you've seen demoed here, most of it is free. The only thing that costs immediately is the CI pipeline itself, enabling that. That's it, and it's vastly cheaper than just about any other solution out there, assuming you're not open source. Again, at the bottom, there's a bit.ly link right there. It's df Dreamforce HK Heroku CI bit.ly/dfhkci. That has links to all the GitHub repositories that I referenced today, and it also has links to installing the Heroku CLI and the Salesforce CLI as well. I put my email and Twitter handle up there, just in case anybody would like to contact me. I'm happy to talk about this. But for now, thank you for coming. Are there any questions? Yeah, right here. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
For example, we have a Git repository.
Mm-hmm.
You given the Git repository URL and this Heroku installation and that will take care.
Is it GitHub or Git? GitHub. Yeah, so again, I did this a day ago. So you can clone the repository that I have in the bit.ly. You can clone that today, and you should be able to do this. It's pretty awesome what can be done just with one setup script.
You have to use the scratch org, or can you just use
So the question was, do you have to use a scratch org? Are you talking about for testing? For the whole CI stuff, there are certainly ways that you could do it. I don't know if the build pack supports not using scratch orgs, but the capability is certainly there. It would just be a matter of how much you wanted to mess with it. Yeah. Is there any support for packaging? The answer is yes. So there are actually 2 separate sample repositories. I've only maintained one, which is the metadata API one, but there is one for packaging as well. If you look at Wade's GitHub, he has them there. Wade was presenting within the developer keynote at 10 a.m. today, or 9 a.m. today, excuse me. If you look at his GitHub repository, he's got an example there of packaging. So it's definitely possible, yes. Admin support? So anything that is retrievable with the Salesforce CLI, which is just about everything now. There used to be some things around reports and dashboards. There used to be a couple other things. Most of that has been resolved. If it can be pulled with the CLI tool, it can be deployed through this. And obviously that will validate, because you're deploying to an org, it'll validate that everything's well structured.
How does this work in disruptive changes if you're going through scratch orgs that wouldn't have what you're trying to deliver?
So you can specify on deploy to warn only when you deploy destructive changes. So at that point, you would just get a warning saying, hey, these don't exist. I'm unsure of how that works necessarily within the build pack itself. So I have no idea if that's supported or not. But destructive changes, certainly it's possible to silently fail.
I wanted to know, when are the review apps created when you create a pull request?
Correct.
Okay, so when a pull request is created from GitHub, a review app would be created on Heroku. So can I access that review app from GitHub itself, or do I have to come to Heroku?
So the question was, can you access a review app directly from GitHub? At this point, I'm not sure of how that would be possible. I'm not sure. One solution would be you're going to have a link to the pipeline from within the pull request. You could go there and then just click on it. And so it would be 2 clicks instead of 1. So you have an indirect way to do it. But as far as a direct link, I don't know of any way right now.
So the GitHub pull request will have a link to the Heroku pipeline, which is associated to the pull
Correct.
request?
Correct.
Okay. And
Yeah.
when does that get populated? After the pull request is created?
The pull request gets created, and then Heroku CI has a hook into GitHub that says, okay, you just created a pull request. It's time for us to create a review app with that branch of code. And then from that point, it will respond back to GitHub and say, okay, we created this review app. Here's where everything is on our side. Does that help answer the question?
Yep. So the Heroku pipeline, when it gets created, the link for that Heroku pipeline is populated on the pull request page.
Not in GitHub. It's just you can go to the pipeline. But you can't go to the org directly, if that's what you're saying.
No. I'm just asking, from GitHub, can I open the Heroku pipeline that is associated with this particular pull request?
Yes, you can open the pipeline. Yes, the question is, what can you open from the GitHub pull request? You can open the Heroku pipeline. You cannot directly open the Scratch org. Yeah. I might have time for 2 more questions here. Okay, yep. The review app's created for each branch. The way we set it up, yes, that you can have a variety of setups, and you can do manual where they're not automatically created, but you can specify what branches you want a review app created on. I'm sorry? You can have multiple yes, if you have multiple pull requests open at the same time, you have multiple review apps. It's 1 review app per pull request. Correct. So if you have branch 1 and branch 2, you have review app 1 and review app 2, and they each are isolated. Yeah. Uh-huh. I don't know the answer to that. Let's talk afterwards, and I might have an answer for you. But yeah, one more.
So can you explain me when setup dot is set, like is my understanding is correct, like you are doing a connected app,
So Salesforce supports authentication through the CLI automatically. You don't have to do any connected. It does use a connected app behind the scenes, but you don't have to configure any of that.
that's already given in the
Yep. They already give you that, so you don't have to do any connected app setup. All right, well, I will stick around outside if anybody else wants to ask questions. I'd love to talk to you more about this, but if not, hope you have a great Dreamforce.